Cool. We're live. So I'm just going to continue working on this today and see if we can move it forward. We've got a few things that we're going to do very drastically different to sort of modify what's going on here. But yeah, let me know if you guys are out there, whether you got questions or things you would like to chat about. But for the moment, I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, the number one thing that I'm sort of thinking is that this is meant to be like a big kind of mural. And it's kind of, let's get a bigger, right? It's kind of like 3 meters high by 7 meters wide. Or at least that's the idea, if we get around to putting it on the wall. And so it kind of means if we sort of look at this, we've got horizon line here, which is kind of like 1 meter off the ground. And hey, Lewis, how you doing? And I was thinking that it might be better to sort of move that up and have that sort of horizon line somewhere in the middle so that we can get that a little bit closer to maybe like where someone would be standing, right? So obviously someone taller, their head's going to be sort of up here, right? Which is sort of like a bit higher. So yeah, sort of somewhere around there. That's kind of the general idea. So that's what I'm sort of playing around with, is how to move that up. And the other thing is, again, it's going to be huge. So the more detail we can put in there, the better. And that's actually something it's interesting. I remember when I was sort of working on film stuff, people would keep saying, you can add heaps of detail to a feature film. If you're sort of designing for like feature animation, like the amount of actual detail that will fit in the frame is crazy. They're rendering these things out at ridiculous resolutions, and in the cinema they're huge, and that's kind of how they're designed. And even with televisions today, they're sort of designed for really, really high resolution. So you can go kind of crazy. So that's what I'm going to try anyway. So I cut out the lion, and the rest can kind of, we'll see what happens. So I'm going to sort of stretch it from the middle. And the other thing is that, again, that might allow me to actually put more of this stuff in the middle, which is sort of cool. So I'm sort of going to try stretching it from there and see what happens, right? See if we can kind of stretch it that way. But yeah, also maybe just kind of stretch it. Yeah, but this is where it's tricky, right? Because we can is probably redraw it. We probably died. So anyway, we're readjusting this thing. And again, I really feel like I need to push it up higher, right? I need to push it up higher, but my brain is kind of wanting me to, kind of really have it still be somewhat lower, which I think is always just kind of one of the challenges, right? So let's see what happens. But I think that'll turn out better. So what I'm going to do is move this over to where it probably needs to be. And then I'll move this one over to where it probably needs to be. Right, like kind of somewhere over there. And this gives us I feel like this gives us a way better arch. But can be tricky. All right. So the trick now is that this perspective here no longer works, right? So I think we still do want the center of vision to be sort of there or somewhere there. We can probably move the lion characters maybe like back here. So I feel like that can sort of still work. What we've got here, I still feel like something in there is going to be more interesting. So yeah, there we go. And what I'm going to do is just do some really simple lines by hand, radiating out here. And this is just going to allow me to basically try and retweak that I did. All right, so I basically need to make this underlying drawing here. I need to make these lines match where that new center of vision would be. Now, again, I feel like this is like a good opportunity just to talk about this kind of thing, because this type of problem is the sort of thing that you run into, right? It's very easy to have these types of things happen, where you sort of start with one idea. Let me pause Dropbox. Intently. Cool. All right, so basically, All right, we're back. Having internet trouble. So as I was sort of saying, yeah, you can see that when we transform that background, that now these lines are heading in the wrong direction. So the goal is we just basically need to massage it into place. And the easiest, most effective, best way of doing that really is just going to be to kind of start again, right? That's going to be the best way of doing it, is to just start again and see what happens. But that can be tricky because it just takes a lot of time, right? So yeah, we'll have to sort of figure out a way to massage it back and forth and do a bit of both. But if we can get it happening for free, then that's obviously the best. And you can actually see if I sort of transform it a little bit this way, right? It's making that bigger, but it's actually moving it in the right direction. And you can see if I just sort of squeeze it this way, it's made it bigger, but I don't think that's actually a huge problem because now it looks a lot bigger. So it's looking bigger, which is good because it looks bigger this way now. And like the whole arch looks bigger. So that's sort of what I'm looking for, is to just sort of be like, does it work? Does it look okay? And this would be a similar situation here, where I've got this bit here, and you can see it's a little bit off. So if we just kind of pushing it that way, right, sort of bam. And now it's sort of doing what we want. And that's going to be more effective. And we've got more control than if I just stretch the whole thing. Cool. So other things we can try here is if we grab all of these things, and this way we can sort of make them a bit bigger, potentially. And again, that might just sort of fill that space a little bit better. Yeah, but I think this will be okay. Now the trick here is this changes that composition quite a bit. Now we can get rid of that thing. We've still got, if we get a line, so we can still see here, right? Everything's still lining up, which is good. Some of these things, maybe not 100%, but that's kind of fine. All right, so got lines here, lines here. Yeah, and so the challenge now is, well, we've sort of got to fill in this space. Now, I guess the good thing about that is we sort of know what needs to be there, and it's mostly just stuff from the ground. So it's not going to be a huge challenge, and it's also going to be, low. So it's not going to be very visible. So hopefully that won't be a problem. I think we'll be okay. Now the job is just to fill in this. If this wasn't a big potential mural, I think one of the things that we'd want to do is maybe make the characters bigger. But that goes back to what I was saying before. Again, I'm not sure whether I was sort of cutting in and out when I was talking about those things, but one of the things that you find is that when we're looking at even if I've got a big 24-inch monitor here, the size from side to side still is nowhere near as big as it would be if it was on a giant television or a movie screen. And we're going to have a tendency to want to kind of make this stuff bigger so that we can see it more. But again, when things are going to be big in the final form, you kind of have to adjust those, I guess, expectations a little bit. So that's kind of the plan here. So I sort of had, right, we had this stuff and that's kind of working. I guess part of me is also thinking we could try and make some of these elements a little bit smaller now. So I've got that needs to stay the same. That's the line. Let's merge all these bits here. And this is probably where it is just going to be easiest to redraw. So if we just kind of erase this out, and this might allow us to redesign this a little bit more. And all I'm going to do is just make these a little bit smaller, so they just feel a little bit less epic in scale compared to the character, right? Because again, you imagine here like a character is kind of standing there. That's pretty big. So again, that's okay, because these things are meant to be sort of quite large pillars, but also I think we need to increase the visual complexity of them a little bit, and also try and make them match the visual design language of the stuff that's in the background a bit more, so it feels like this is part of that same world. So again, let me know if you have got any questions about this sort of part of the process. I would say this is a good example of how one of the things you really need to be comfortable doing is readjusting. So, getting to a point where you don't feel as if it's the end of the world if you have to redo some things or mess around with it. And this is also a good opportunity to talk about the idea of what happens when you've got time to think about it. So, if we're sort of doing a demo in just one go, then you often don't have really the time to think about this stuff. And, it's easy to kind of miss these simple ideas and then just scoot past it. Whereas in this case, we had a bit of that time off. And so it was easy to be able to see, oh yeah, I could do this. And then I sort of get time to think about it. And I think that's where it becomes less of a loss aversion thing, where, I'm sort of terrified that I've wasted, or I've spent all this time doing this. How do I hang on to it, right? How do I hang on to that original idea? Whereas in this case, I don't really care about that, because that was the previous me that designed this stuff, and present me is smarter and faster and stronger than previous me. And so he knows best. And so I feel confident to sort of trash it a little bit. So yeah, from a design perspective, if we were thinking that we're in a design 101 class, this is a very boring shape, right? It doesn't have a lot of interest. So we could probably address that as well and give it, right? Try and give this sort of shape here a little bit more interest. Let's try and make sure we find some sort of center of that. And yeah, just see if we can create a more interesting shape or set of shapes here. If we do this sort of thing, it makes everything else kind of a lot easier. So all I'm doing is just basic form drawing boxes. Let's put a few lines here. Putting this little grid here really helps when I'm sort of rotated, right? So you see if I'm kind of rotating around and I'm going here and I'm going there, having a few lines that we have drawn, right? Again, if we sort of, use, let's do it by hand. So just sort of gridding this out a bit really helps. It's not that these are going to be that accurate, but they help when I'm rotated, right? When I'm rotated, I'm not able to sort of calculate in my mind where that sort of center is. That's where these little grids will really help. Now, it kind of ruins your image a bit, puts a whole bunch of silly lines everywhere, but it's often worth it in the long run. There we go. Right, so that goes in, that goes there. That's the line I was kind of looking for. This goes in here, right? Something like that. Now, obviously, this is all going to be a bit hacked up in the end and overgrown, but the first step is to sort of draw it in there properly and see if it's going to work. And again, I'm looking kind of for something that feels a bit more as if it is like a threshold, or right, we sort of got these two pillars or guards that are stopping us from sort of entering here. That's sort of the goal, and to sort of increase this feeling that we're going into the image. And again, we could maybe, increase that feeling that maybe this, right, like sort of continues off there. Now, again, we were playing around with the concept of maybe there being sort of gates here or something like that. That might be something that's, worth trying to introduce now, because it might feel a little bit less dramatic because we've got a bit more space. And I think we decided on, wanting it to feel more abandoned and less sort of as if it had been ruined or something. But again, just a little bit of stuff there might sort of help to, talk about how, there was a gate there once. All right. And yeah, so we might have some sort of like iconography or some sort of ancient language or thing here that's kind of helping us to understand what's going on. All right, so that's, I guess the thing is I want to sort of transfer this, right, and put it over there. Again, a cheaty way of doing that would be to sort of take this bit of it, all right, and we'll go Control-Shift-J, which will give us, no, we don't. I just want Control-J. That will copy it. Right, now I can kind of drag it over here. Control-J will flip horizontal. And yeah, we can sort of see there, right? That's where that's ending. It's going to come sort of hit, yeah. Almost there, something like that. Cheap trick. But if I follow that along, again, I'm moving it around the page so that my hand has better access to the type of line that I need to create. So I'm just sort of guesstimating where it goes. But yeah, because we're not going to see as much of it. So we'll see whether that guesstimation works. Often if you're trying to cheat things like that, you can often run into trouble where you kind of think, oh, I got away with it. Look at that. I don't have to redraw that. And then you kind of just chase your tail around all day trying to, unmess it all up, as it were. So Lewis is asking a question, is the full piece going to be paint-like, or is the character going to be sort of in line work and the background painted or whatever? I think in this case, Lewis, I'm going to do the whole thing sort of with line. So it'll be just sort of a line drawing. And yeah, that's sort of what we'll have to deal with. So yeah, it's going to be all lines. So that, that's another reason why I'm drawing all these things out. I'm pretty confident that they will kind of stay there, and that drawing them all out, figuring that everything will be worth it. So yeah, I'll be using quite a small, maybe like a number 10 brush or something. Right. So the final thing's going to be quite, right. It's pretty big. It's like 15,000 wide. But you can see that, this will be probably the finished line size, maybe like a little bit smaller, an 8 or something. And, this will allow me, I can sort of draw, the noses or, all those sort of things. So it'll be pretty epic, right? It'll be pretty detailed line drawing. It probably won't look that good unless you view it really big. That's kind of my goal, because those things always look funny when they're big, right? If you don't have the detail in there, it always looks weird to have something be sort of printed huge. We'll see. I haven't done this before, so I don't know. No idea whether that will even work. So I'm going to grab this from over here as well. Control J. Oh. See if I can put that on there. And then just try to pay a bit more attention to what we actually had here. And there's probably a limit to what you should do in terms of complexity with something like this. I think I can hide a lot of it by just putting many of these things under, they'll be sort of chipped and there'll be stuff all over the place, like vines and leaves and things like that. But you do have to be careful. Like basically designing lots of fancy, silly things that are kind of actually quite difficult to draw in perspective, because then if we get them wrong, if I draw a bunch of little details here and I have to transfer it and I get it wrong, it's going to look really, really average. All right, so we've got some type of plant that was kind of planted in there that's now overgrown. And same thing here, except in this case, again, want to play with those shapes. So just blocking in shapes and thinking about stuff. That's what allows me to sort of move quickly through this, because there's going to be a lot of this sort of nonsense. And then there's also going to be a lot of just sort of noodling and drawing these bits and pieces. And we got to break it up, because the thing that will really slow this type of process down is having to redraw a bunch of detail. So having to rework a lot of this stuff, like if we just lazily design the shape and then we sort of go in there and, ink it all out and sort of try and make something up, and then you kind of zoom out and you're like, that's actually boring. That's the problem. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to sort of avoid. All right, that's sort of there. That's there. And we did have a few sort of random boards or planks or things. We probably have to really figure out where they're going to be though. So again, just blocking in primary form things here. These need to be a lot more interesting, but we can use some ideas like this potentially to kind of help us lead the eye. We make a new window of this, and we'll put that on a separate screen so I can see it. And the idea still is to sort of have a, this kind of circular window. But yeah, maybe I could put a few little sort of ruins or some sort of other stuff here that's fallen down. Again, from where? Don't know. Okay, we're going to have to hack this up. And all of these things will sort of be covered in vines and grass and stuff. Again, might be good to have a few of these kind of silhouette pops or things like that. And also to see if we can create some sort of shapes on the ground to kind of lead our eye a little bit, right? So to keep it away from here. And the other thing is with this is we do want as much sort of overlapping depth as possible, right? So as much stuff as we can have that's kind of right overlapping and showing us that depth, the more of that, the better. Because otherwise it can be very tricky to actually get some good foreground stuff. All right. So the goal there is to sort of tell the story of the depth, right? And again, make us feel as if we're really seeing in. Now, there's two ways that could go. And one is to kind of flatten out, right? If we sort of flatten out this, it really makes us feel as if we are right here with these characters, as opposed to, the fact that they're kind of further away. So we could kind of flatten out this foreground and really make sure that these feel like the foreground. Again, lots of different ways to go there. Yeah, we'll play around with that as we go. And often, it'll be tricky to tell whether that's working or not until we get to the point where we can, see it blocked in with tone again. So again, a bit more sort of overgrowth. Right, see, the idea is, right, again, they've kind of come, like there sort of needs to be a bit of a reason why they're sort of going here, maybe now. So maybe if we put a few more like things here to make it clear that they're kind of journeying on, right? That there's a reason they're not just sort of here, if that makes sense. So if we put something there on the ground, it helps us tell the depth story, gives us more silhouette. I sort of want to avoid just a giant chunk of grass because that's actually quite challenging to just sort of paint a giant field of grass. It's a lot easier to have silhouettes to surround it, and that way we can sort of play with the lighting as well in the foreground and show the lighting kind of going across forms. All right, so there we go, there's that background. So let's see if we can have another go at this. I'm just going to drag down to here a copy of that in case I need it, and see what happens now that we've got this extra space. So I think what we can do is probably put another building or something there, right, to sort of extend that space a little bit. Right, show some extra scale. And again, this was going to be sort of a tree. Now, I don't know whether we put buildings here or not, or whether we still want to kind of keep right one side of this being more open. Again, lots and lots of different options for ways we could go there. In my experience, again, with something that's sort of so big, it's infinitely easier to create interesting stuff by showing overlap versus trying to kind of like paint stuff that's all on one plane. So that's sort of, I guess, where I'm, making some of those decisions. And again, there's a lot more we could do in terms of making decisions here, designing this out, making this more interesting. But for now, what I'm thinking about is just that large scale, right? How do we show that depth? And again, I do want to kind of try and mirror that archway in some way, because that gives us context. And again, the more we can potentially mirror the archway, the better. But all of these things will need another pass, right? So the fundamental thing here is this is all just sort of first pass, first go. So again, maybe this will be in, this will be behind there. Again, I'm just trying to be like, how can I arrange stuff? Just one block. You can imagine it if, as literally as if they are just kind of kids blocks. And what we're trying to do is just place one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, and see, whether when we look through the lens at that, whether or not we get something interesting or not. But part of me still wants to sort of keep this as a balance, right? Keep this kind of clear so that if when we look over here, our eye goes straight to the character. And again, it sort of gives us a bit of sort of contrast. So that's part of the conscious plan. Anyway, that's the idea. So what we had before was a collection of this stuff. I don't know whether any of that is going to work anymore. And it can be frustrating to have to redo this sort of thing. But yeah, I don't think it'll actually take that long. So we'll try and block in the major shadow shape. And see how we go. Right, get this. Right, got the front. Got this. Right, this. And even though some of these things can be tedious, if it's your process and this is the kind of thing that you're trying to do, I really do recommend, just biting the bullet and redoing these things. It can take a while, but it's really easy to just sort of check what's going on in the image. And, I think once we're all said and done, it's going to take a few seconds extra only. I think that'll be sort of fine. Cool. All right. So I think we lost a few little gaps there, and probably some here as well. So still got that main idea there. And then we had this one. Got this. And yeah, and it is quite risky, creating a file this big. There's lots of things that can go wrong. Most of them just that Photoshop is gonna not be happy if it's that big. And again, then we had a few sort of clouds, and we had some sort of sense of that light coming there. There we go. So we're still going to have that, right? Frames where the light is coming from, and that needs to go underneath there. Cool. All right, so we can get rid of most of this now. And play around with, just putting in a bunch of this tonality. So again, this stuff like replanning, right, redoing the thumbnail, super useful. This proves that the sketch that we're doing is going to work, and more importantly, it's also going to very much clarify whether things are going to work without me needing to do an extra step there with drawing everything better. So it keeps everything kind of loose. I think often it's actually a lot better if we can kind of test these things out when everything is a little bit sort of looser. Because you can tell that, like, if I had done any of this, if I'd drawn any of this well, I'd be very frustrated now, because again, I've sort of had to kind of throw that away and completely sort of redraw. So again, making sure that is the case, I think, is super useful. We just have a way to sort of check, are those shapes working? Is it interesting? Now, the other thing we had is a sense here that we had light falling across. So I think that is worth pursuing again. But in this case, we have got much, much more that is in the light. So I'm gonna sort of just delete that. And now it's a matter of thinking, where do those shadows fall? If we're going this way, can we still tell that story with the lion's tail? Right? Let's see if we can carve out a bit here. Again, tell the story of the light over there, over there, and again over here. Got a bit. So I'm just playing around, partly with shape, not thinking too much about where would that actually be. Let's see what this grass would look like. Now, if I'm confident that the image will work, right? If I look at the thumbnail and I can kind of see it, it does mean that I can actually then start to make up a lot of the other stuff when I'm inking. So I don't always have to do quite as much if I make sure that this side of it is working. So there's an importance there. Now I'm going to also play around with the idea of making, this foreground a little bit darker. See if that works. Again, just an idea. That probably will make sense. Yeah, we're going to have some sort of shadows cast over here. And what you can always sort of say is that, well, there's some stuff, we could easily just say that, well, there's something up here that's casting shadows over here. Right. So we can always make stuff up and justify there being shadows wherever we want. We never have to kind of feel as if, there has to be a particular sort of shadow anywhere, and unless that's part of the brief or, something that's really sort of super important. But we can always just, sort of imagine, there's going to be shadow here just because. And again, I guess there's two questions here. One is, where would the shadow be? And then the second thing would be, how intense and how bright is it? So at the moment, these shadows are being quite strong. And I think it's good to design them when you've got a lot of sort of strength in there, so you can really see whether they make sense and whether it feels like, again, that there is kind of light falling across the scene there. And this, again, is where I can kind of say, well, the most important thing is the black and white tonal arrangement, really. So, I can actually just prioritize and play around with that and sort of forget about, what's happening with the other stuff. So, if I need to carve out a giant bit of light because I think it's going to look good, right, from a zoomed out point of view, then I can do that. I don't have to sort of, follow what I did as a sketch because, again, I did it really rough. So again, just playing around with, like, am I making it better or worse? Right, is this making it better or worse? worse? Better or worse? Yeah, so I think I do feel like I want all of this stuff in the foreground to be like a very similar tonality. I don't want heaps of separation between the foreground and that other stuff. Again, it feels like you do want foreground separation, but again, I want the primary focus to be on the background there. Got some things. Yeah. All right. And again, we could have, some of this sort of lit up, but I think the whole idea is we kind of want to look here. So anyway, I think that's probably enough to kind of test out the idea. We've probably made this a bit rough, adding all those grass bits there, but that's all right. So playing around with the idea that some of these rocks are not going to be as bright as the grass. So from a compositional standpoint, that's probably something that's worth taking into consideration. The grass there is probably going to be the most, like the brightest green. And let's try make a new layer. This again is tricky because I'm going to sort of put a gradient up, but you really do have to watch out putting gradients on files this big, because they take up so much pixel room. So let's see if I can. See if I can isolate this little bit there. That's probably what we sort of want, is to have it something like that. Does that make sense? Who's listening? Let me know if you guys have got questions about this. Because again, often with these compositional things, like I've got an idea, and I'm kind of like babbling about stuff, but it's only really until you kind of put those final bits and pieces in there that I guess that the idea makes sense. So the goal there is to assure that we still have this nice vignette, right, where we're looking through this sort of window. And again, that's at a higher level. Like that's more important for that to be the case than for us to have a realistic sense of lighting, if that makes sense. And I think that is something that really can trip us up, is if you're kind of mixed in your mind about, well, what would the light be doing? And you always have to have a mix between what the light would be doing and what you need it to be doing. That's where it becomes more of an art, less of a craft. The craft side is like, where exactly does the light go? That's the sort of stuff we learn and think about when we're doing our bootcamp material renderings and our lighting geoforms and stuff. Is like, well, there's no art to it. It's just, where does it go? The second thing we think about is like, well, where do I want it to be? Yeah. So anyway, that's that. Now we've got a tricky thing here because I got a mask on this and a mask on that. I actually want to keep that mask. I'm just going to drag it down there. I'm going to do something funny. I'm going to put this in a group. I'm going to put the mask back on the group there, and then I'm going to put a mask on that layer, and it's going to allow me to just kind of pull out some of that gradient, right? Because I do think I want, if we sort of zoom out, right, I do want there to be that little sort of halo light over here. But yeah, exactly how bright that is, we have to sort of be subtle with. So we're going to have something, again, probably something a bit like this. And the background is going to be very high key. So, you know, all sort of bright lights, it's atmospheric, it's in the distance. And so what that does is it's kind of organizing the image into two values, right? We got foreground and background. So it's a very simple image, very graphic. And again, I think that's important to kind of help the idea of it sort of being a mural or something like that. Now, stuff that we could do to enhance that is to, and this is something I have sort of been contemplating, is, you know, like if we actually, oh, no, it needs to go there, right, is maybe if we actually made this kind of archway closed. Because then if it's closed, I think the benefit is that it really makes it this window into another place. So that is something, right, that like I am sort of tossing around. It's like, do we want to do that? Now, again, there's different ways we could do that. Right, we could just play around with maybe some of that being moss and vines and things that are kind of growing down. All right, like maybe it's not 100% everywhere, but you know, this kind of helps us control, right? Control that eye down there. Again, I feel like we need to have that, the fact that there is like an arch there at some point. So yeah. And this is another area where, again, just some basic sort of design stuff will kind of come in handy. Just thinking about sort of 1, 2, 3 and interesting shape design. All right, but that's probably, again, there's a point at which I can sort of feel myself sort of fiddling around with it and not necessarily getting any better with it. I do kind of just really like the feeling of it being an arch. Again, could it be more of an arch like this? Is that going to make it better or worse? Because the problem is, if you get a weird tangent there, that's going to make it even worse. So part of me is like, it's probably going to have to stay like that. Yeah. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a break in a few seconds, and that'll allow me to, again, just get my bearings. And then when we come back for the second kind of hour of the stream, what I'll basically go through is just do another round of drawing over the top of everything. So doing it like this gives me the confidence to know that, yeah, you know, it's looking all right. The composition will probably hold up. What's lacking is just detail, right? Secondary forms like the characters, figuring out what's really happening. Now that I can rely on this, what we'll do is, yeah, just make sure that everything just has more detail. So all the characters have got like more detail in them, all of these little bits of grass, and I'll draw some plants. What is in these pots up here? We need to put in more foliage and rough that in. So it's just a matter of being a little bit more detailed with it. And it's so important to trust the composition and trust where we're going with it, though, because what I'm going to do is basically get to a point where I'm just drawing in line, and I'm not going to be able to see half of those details. So I'm going to lose this overall feeling of the image for quite a while as I go through this next process. And that is one of the downsides of the line and color process, is you don't get that instant feedback. You kind of got to trust that when I put all the pieces back together again, it's going to sort of look like this, but with more detail and color and stuff. So anyway, that's all for the moment. We'll come back in maybe 5 minutes and do some more. We'll do some actual drawing of actual characters. So that should be fun. We'll catch you then. All right. So just checking the previous sort of image we had here, which again is quite sort of similar in many ways, different sort of environment here. And yeah, this does become, so let me check how big this file is. Yeah, so it's getting pretty big. It's only like sort of 500 meg, which is not that crazy. So I think we'll be okay to leave some of this stuff in here. Although I might delete this just because that's probably going to give us a bit of extra space. And can probably delete all this stuff as well. And I might actually just save a version of it. Cool. All right. So if I open up the previous one, again, we can just sort of check our progress, see where we've gone. Let's just take a sec in Photoshop. So that's kind of where we were. All right, we've gone from there to there. Yeah, so again, we've made some progress, I guess, with defining the space. And the next step, just delete that, close this. The next step is to just look at the characters and sort of some of the stuff we had organized there and see if we can add all of that detail to this image. So a good idea there is to check that final line sort of fidelity that we're after. So I'm going to create a new white layer. I'm going to reduce the opacity, and new layer above that, I'm going to press B for brush. And as I said, I'm thinking of like an 8 pixel brush or something, right? Which is quite small. So we're going to be dealing with sort of lines that are this big. Right, we're going to have this sort of character here, and I think this is going to allow us to do what we need to actually get some detail in there. And I know from experience that this type of this size of brush is enough to kind of get us where we want to be. So that means for the rougher version, I think it's always important to use a larger brush. And that's because I don't really have time, and I never really work this way anyway, but I don't really have time to go in there and do a 1-for-1 rough drawing pass where basically I'm doing exactly the same fidelity of line that I'm going to use for the final sort of ink. I'm always going to be a little bit looser and use a sort of a larger brush size, and that will allow me to basically make up more detail. So it does two things. It stops me fussing over little lines and things that aren't going to make a difference, and it focuses me on the task of actually figuring out primary and secondary forms and not worrying too much about those sort of bigger things that probably aren't gonna make a big difference anyway. So, but the point there is I'm starting with figuring out how big the lines are going to be in the first place, right? When I do them finish, and then I'm just picking something that's it's a bit bigger than that, and that will give me a pretty good indication. Now, again, here I've sort of got to draw this line at the same time, right? Or at least think about where that rib cage is. Because that is going to allow me to kind of understand the curve of the saddle. So I don't really need to, go crazy and draw the whole line, but I do need to understand, look, where is that spine going, right? So I've sort of got, these are the hips, all right? Going to make sure those are going in perspective, right? We got the tail here. Right, we can rough in that form, right? Think about dimensionality of the tail, can draw it in. And yeah, one of the things I noticed when I was looking at the reference for these types of saddles originally was that, yeah, often they did sort of tie something around the tail to help secure the saddle. So that's something I'm going to sort of do. And I'm just guesstimating most of this stuff. I'm doing form drawing. I'm kind of imagining like the length of the creature that way. So here, again, he has this sort of saddle that comes down. And just before I do that, I'm going to make sure, again, I've got a good understanding of where these things are coming on the other side. Right. And so you can see that the straddled, like the width of the lion's torso there is quite wide. So what we actually need to sort of do, right, is think about, okay, where does the lion's torso actually start? Right. And then what I'm going to sort of do is build, right, like a secondary saddle on top of that so that you can actually, as a human, sit on it. And again, we'll draw through. Right, sort of constructing this stuff. And again, I think in many cases, right, I give it like a little sort of backrest. Again, important here to think about where that center line is of the character, right, where the center line is. Right, so this is sort of the rib cage of the lion. Now, again, these things are always tricky because if you do drawing teaching, what we do is we often exaggerate, right? So we exaggerate these ideas and sort of draw through and really show the draw through. When I'm doing it, I'm trying to not show them. I'm trying to put in as much of that structure as I can without actually showing too much of it, because I don't want it to be seen in the actual sort of finished thing. So, it's kind of how you teach it and how you do it, or for me, are a little bit different. So I'm sort of doing here how I sort of do it. And I'll double check the skeleton, but my understanding is, again, back here, we're going to sort of have the hips. And again, we basically got upper leg, right, lower leg. We're going to have something like that. Boom. Right, boom, boom. Now, again, I'm putting these in and I'm putting them in faintly, and I'm mainly doing that just so I know where they are. Just and again, that might change. I haven't triple checked that sort of anatomy. again, we've sort of got shoulder blade, right? Upper arm, lower arm. Right. So again, slightly different sort of connection. If you look at, if we can kind of Google, and normally, you know, sometimes I'll kind of make up a, let me do, yeah, so if you sort of just look at a standard sort of skeleton, you can see the basic sort of idea of what I'm trying to do. Right, so you can see here, up here, we've got those sort of shoulder blades, right? That's where the shoulder is. And that sort of, again, the back legs don't line up one for one with the front legs in terms of sort of shoulder hip joint, right? They're a little bit off. So, but again, that's the basic idea. So just looking at these basic shapes, you know, looking at the skeleton here also is going to be useful. Can be useful to kind of, you know, grab those things and have them on a separate monitor if you need, or, you know, again, often can be a really good idea to build a little file. Just kind of have that as a reference. But yeah, the basic idea is we're going to have we've got that sort of rib cage here. We've got the skeleton backbone kind of coming here. And we've got the hips here. Now, again, I'm sort of drawing them as, again, sort of as in lips. Again, that sort of helps to center them in my mind a little bit. But yeah, I think so some of the key anatomical differences I'm sort of noticing here are that in my mind, I was probably thinking of something a little bit more sort of like a horse or something like that from an anatomical perspective. But you can see there on that skeleton that the lion hips are very sort of close to the top, right? So on the cat, right, those hips are quite high. And then we've got that sort of first joint there. And looks like, again, that sort of first joint is, right, if we sort of put it somewhere down here. So again, I'm just sort of feeling this stuff out, right? A better way of doing it, the more you would draw these types of things, I feel like the better you would get at really figuring out a system for it, whereas I don't really have a system for it at the moment, right? But again, I've sort of got shoulder blades kind of somewhere up there, and then the shoulder blades kind of come forward, right? So that sort of comes forward, and then that upper arm comes down. And again, they kind of meet, right? Like somewhere under, like near that bottom of the rib cage, right? So the rib cage, again, the mass of the stomach and the mane is going to go well underneath that, potentially, again, because the head is kind of, right, sort of down a little bit in my mind, right? So head is kind of down there somewhere. Right, spine is there, and yeah, that rib cage isn't as big because, again, when I'm sort of massing in that initial shape, I'm just trying to be like, oh, this is kind of how big it is. As I kind of draw as I kind of, figure out the anatomy again and do that sort of second pass on things, I'm sort of seeing the actual kind of size. And if we think about that's where those are, I reckon that the rib cage is probably gonna, right? It's probably gonna end somewhere there. So this is a matter of being faint, right? So you can see earlier when I was doing these things, I was kind of just really kind of squiggling in there and being like, just kind of like, oh, we got a thing here, right? You can see right, it's a little bit more like that. And that's because, again, as I said, we do those initial sort of block-ins to really just make sure we're not getting attached to drawings, right? To me, it's almost better if they're not good. When I'm trying to construct it, I'm being a lot more procedural. I'm sort of going slowly and being a lot more sensible, one could say. So again, we're going to have sort of the skull somewhat there. Again, I'll do an actual pass, but this is kind of how I do all of these things. I'm not sitting there trying to be like, how do I draw a line or whatever, and I'll do line practices before I do it. I know kind of roughly how, as I was sort of saying, I know roughly how a quadruped goes, right? It's kind of got a shoulder blade here, upper arm here, right, and sort of lower arm here, but they're all kind of different. The angles are slightly different. But what I always recommend is that, like, this is the drawing practice. Like, this phase is the drawing practice. This is where I'm sitting there looking at reference a little bit and sort of trying to figure out, okay, like how does the anatomy on a cat go? And, if I did 10, 20 sort of images, or I did a whole book with just these characters, eventually through the process of doing that, through the process of being here and just having to figure it out, I'd get good at it. I'd get better at it. I'd figure out, like what you actually have to do. And, eventually I'd probably get to a stage where I didn't need to do it as much. I could just sort of, I know those proportions, but I say this a lot, is that, the work you actually do can be your sort of practice, right? That can be the thing that makes you better. You don't have to kind of say, oh, I need to do anatomy studies before I do an image like this. Like, yeah, as long as you've got this phase, right? I mean, most people can probably just squiggle in, right? Like, here's a head, right? Like, here's a body. There's no drawing there that sort of, is advanced. And the same thing with this, right? Again, there's sort of logic to it, but it's really just blocks. It's just geoform block, right? Again, that's within the realm of possibility for most people. And so I think you can sort of get to the stage previous to this. Again, it takes a lot of perspective understanding and drawing scenes understanding, but you can get to that stage where you kind of got stuff blocked in. And, again, do your anatomy practice here, right? Where we're actually drawing stuff. So again, not entirely sure where his focus will be. I remember I was sort of saying, like, I've kind of forgotten where I said everyone was going to be kind of looking. I feel like, again, this character's sort of going to be looking this way, right? I want this character to kind of be looking that way. Something like that. So all I'm doing to plan that is just sphere plus dimensionality and directionality of the imagined head, right? Obviously there'll be a face to go along with that, but I don't want or need to put it in just yet because of the same reason I've been harping on about for ages. We don't always want to put stuff in until we're 100% sure it's going to stay there, because otherwise it is really annoying to have to change it. And I think often it's a really important point to understand, is that your desire and your ability to change stuff, right, is going to change based on how fun it looks like it's going to be. So if you really view it as like, oh man, that's going to take me ages to just tweak that one little thing, then you're not likely to do it. Whereas, if I want to sort of say, oh, let's play around with her head sort of, again, looking this way, as opposed to this way, it's very easy at this stage to do that. So yeah, I feel like that's like a really important thing to pay attention to, because a big part of, and again, as I say that, I'm like, maybe that is better, right? That they're all kind of looking into the frame. Anyway, the point is that a big part of what separates people who are just beginning with drawing from people who've been doing it for a while and are a lot more comfortable and a lot more proficient, is just your ability to understand that thing's wrong, that needs changing. And in many cases, it's just being able to do that in a relaxed fashion, right? So being able to do that and then not freaking out, because you have to do that. Super, super important. And I think a big part of that is just not committing until you're sure. Right? If you don't commit, then yeah, it's like it's not like you made a mistake yet, if that makes sense. Because to a certain degree, we need to manage our own ego, right? Because that is very much going to change the relationship we have to it. So the style is going to be somewhat cartoony, right? The heads are going to be, a little bit sort of cartoony there. And again, this thing's similar to the previous sort of image in basic composition and position of the characters. And to a certain degree, that is going to be because there's going to be optimal positions for drawing characters like this. Right? Characters look better from certain angles, and that's sort of important to understand. So again, just sort of trying out some of these details. Again, I might do some redesign on some of these things. We'll see. And again, always important to put in all the arms and stuff. It's really, I often will get like in this case, get sort of stuck drawing stuff that won't be there, because again, you sort of can't see it because there's someone's arm in the way. So again, but that can just be stick figure, right? Or again, put that there. Or let's think about where's the center of that. It's coming up here. Again, I've often got this. If you look in the reference, right, there's a bit of like a, right, I don't know what it's called. Again, I think I said the same thing last time. A bit on the saddle there. And he could just kind of have his his hand there. Maybe he's got his sword, right, if his arms here. this would be his, no, yeah, that's left hand. So this would probably be the right hand. So maybe there's like a sword here. And that would maybe say to us, oh, he's taking this seriously. Who knows? Again, these are just tiny little lines and ideas at the moment. And here, okay, we've got the stirrups. Got the saddle bit. And again, just going, I'm trying to avoid putting detail in too early. All right, joint here. Yeah, so I feel like this proportion here is looking a little bit more lion cat-like. Obviously, if we think a little bit about what skeleton is, so again, the cat skeleton, that will allow us to put in a lot of that muscle a bit easier. So just, again, putting in some of those rough markers for where that anatomy is going to go. And yeah, and then it's just going to be a matter of like finding reference for, what these different sort of bits look like. That'll be something that we kind of do as we go. Ears somewhere there. And anything, again, that I'm not 100% sure about, we'll just make sure that we put it in, but be very subtle about it. And again, I think it's really important to get the feeling that these characters are above us. So, even though it's kind of subtle, I'm just gonna really just keep pushing the exaggeration and the idea that we're sort of looking up. So again, this character here. Now, again, exactly what's happening with this anatomy, I don't know. But it would be good to have some character interaction, maybe. Right. The more, because again, the angle of the face is important, because some of these angles are going to be more interesting than others. And some are going to allow us to tell the story of depth a little bit more. All right, so again, I'm trying to show that, again, we're looking up. We're looking up at the character. And I'm looking up at the reference of the character as well on a separate screen. So the center line, center. Again, this is super rough, but this is what is gonna allow me to do it. Okay, so again, we got that. Gonna eyeball these curves. So again, when we're doing the rough construction, right, I can leave as many of these in as I want. It's actually really good to kind of leave as many of these structural marks in as possible, because when I come to do the final one, I'll sort of have them in there. And so as I do the finished sort of version, I'll be referencing some of these marks, right? That's why, again, it's this stage feels a little bit more structural. So again, that ear starts there. I'm going to draw the ear without the sort of armory stuff on it, right? And then it's kind of got like his ear is coming through his armor. This makes no sense from a practical standpoint, but I think hopefully it'll kind of look interesting. And again, back there. So one of the good things about just designing stuff on the fly is it's very easy to just sort of say, hey, yep, let's just change that shoulder pad so it fits better. So we see more of the face. And okay, let's see if we can draw through that sword. Draw through, make that super easy. Find center on that rib cage. See if we can draw this other shoulder pad there. Right. Let's make sure again that this other shoulder pad doesn't get too high. We don't start just drawing stuff all over the place. So yeah, it's just, this is what we do. We just go through, construct it all. And again, I won't go in there and detail it. I feel like a part of me sort of wants to, but I also know that I might have to change a whole bunch of it. And so at this phase, we're just thinking structure, structure, structure. That's all. It's just about structure. It's not about, you know, like the finished lines or anything. It's like structure, tangents. And in my head, I'm kind of thinking like, well, this is kind of what the character's going to feel, right? This is kind of what they're doing at this point in time. But again, that will sort of be overlaid at the next phase when we, you know, actually sort of draw that out. All right, so there's the hand. So yeah, let me know if this is all making sense, whether you can kind of see where this is going. So again, I don't want to draw those faces too much until sort of sure that's positioned well. And this is where, again, good to have plenty of stick figure action. So we've got torso there. Right, the hips for this character are kind of down lower. And you can see in that previous, right, in the previous one that we did. So you can see this character is kind of sitting here, and these guys have this sort of platform that's built back. So they're kind of sitting there. That's the general idea. Sorry, got to drag that back to this other monitor. Cool. So yeah, I'm trying to make sure that that's happening, but let's sort of think about where those lines are. So in this case, right, I'm sort of I'm having another go at designing it basically. I'm going to make it a little bit more curved. That's kind of where it would be over there. I feel like this character's probably going to have to come in a little bit to feasibly be sitting on here. So the idea is, again, maybe there's some sort of sacks and food provisions being sort of hung around back here. And that's kind of what she's kind of sitting there resting on. And maybe again, got to have something for her hand to kind of rest on. Maybe there's some sort of like rope netting or something like that she's sort of able to grab, right? Got shoulder. So again, I'm drawing that shoulder through. More elf ears. Here we go. Oh, bad tangent. So bad tangents everywhere. There'll probably be way more because of the hair. That's okay. So yeah, probably that's okay. That'll get sort of covered up anyway. Gonna have hair. And going around there, got some sort of headpiece thing. Right, so again, probably what I'd class what I'm doing now is like probably getting ahead of myself with the drawing. I really should just figure out the stick figures, and that again, I think that side of it is like really hard to do. You know, it is really hard to just constantly be like, don't draw, get the stick figure worked out. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because again, the stick figure doesn't look interesting. It's just like boring. So again, create some forward momentum with the hair. Can use that to sort of say that we're sort of moving. Again, I'm just got to keep reminding myself, just keep it simple. So yeah, structure. But the more structural we are here at this point, and I think we're sort of almost at the end of this session, so we'll have to go in a minute. But yeah, the more structural we are here, the easier it'll be to just go in and do the inking over the top of this, because I can make up most of these details. The problem is, like, if we draw the face in the wrong spot, then I'm going to have to like sort of redo it, right? So the main things we want to make sure here are like, is the face the right size, right? Is it in the right position? Is it going to allow me to see all these things at once? And that's the most important stuff in terms of like the subtlety of of all of those details, that's something I'll do in the finished lines. And the thing to do here is just to make sure that the basics are there, and the more structural we are here, the quicker everything will be. So that is the main reason that, you know, I'm sort of being structural here, is that it means overall we'll be able to be a lot quicker and a lot looser at that final stage. But yeah, typically I'll do a pass like this, and then again we'll, you know, step back and have a look at it, and we'll be able to, you know, assess. You know, once we sort of have a go at doing that, then we can sort of step back and be like, okay, does this make sense? Do these characters look like they're the right sort of size? You know, for one of the things I do kind of notice is like, well, yeah, I mean, maybe just some of this stuff is sort of too low, right? So once I sort of construct it all out and we've got, you know, this character, maybe just this whole thing sort of needs to come up a little bit more. And again, that's kind of how I think we sort of want it to be, because that'll make it feel like, again, we're looking up at the characters more. But that's the sort of stuff that we kind of need to figure out. So again, what we'll do is you know, we'll come back. I think the next streaming session we have is on this Thursday, so same time at 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Adelaide Australian time. And yeah, so we'll come back in a few days and we'll basically just keep going, right? So the goal is to kind of do this, but for everything. And again, you know, I'll probably have to, you know, play around with some of these things and have a look at it. But it's really good to have breaks, you know, if you're doing this kind of thing. It's very easy to, again, try and go too quickly, or to, yeah, not be able to see what's going on. You know, this is where we need to start flipping things, just checking, you know, are we getting everything in the right spot? Is this working? Right? If we flip it, does it work better? And again, just kind of, you know, keep plugging away, keep adding structure, and just always checking, like, is this working? Is the structure functioning? Is it gonna you know, is it gonna match everything else in the scene? So that's what we've got to keep doing. And yeah, we'll see you guys on Thursday, where we continue to do that.